Hey friends, I'm Christy and you're listening to Rock the Damn Boat. If you've ever bitten your tongue to keep the peace or said yes when every part of you wanted to say no, this one's for you. We're diving into the messy, real stuff that people pleasers like me have spent years avoiding. It's time to have the hard conversations, shake things up, and learn to stand tall even when it makes waves. That was option 2 from my little AI intro help, and nobody voted on the poll, so we're going to go with that one until you decide to vote otherwise. So if you missed last week's poll with the motherhood episode, then you can go and find that and vote. And, I'm kind of digging this one. This one feels the most authentic to me. So if you're watching this, you saw that I had to read it off my phone here, but I will get it going and eventually it will be like second nature. I said it feels the most authentic. Today is a Sunday shorty, and yes, I am recording in real time on Sunday. I don't know with my life if I will ever get ahead, but we will take it as it comes, one day at a time. I was digging into I have a box of mementos, and maybe you have a box like that where you keep like old yearbooks and old journals or old pictures, scrapbooks, things like that. And I have a tote in the closet, and every once in a while, 2-3 years, I'll go through it and look to see what's in there. And I feel like there's always something that stands out to me that is very appropriate to my time or whatever I'm going through that season of life. And I even went through a book, and I meant to look up the author's name before I hopped on to record, but it was, the book was called Something More. Cassie Joy Garcia is our Cook Once, Eat All Week cookbook author. Love her, Cassie Joy Garcia. This was, I will find it and I will put it somewhere in social media on a post in my comments. But it was called Something More, and you worked through different aspects of your life. You did field work, she called it, and you went through those old things and looked to see what clues they left you. And for me, like I have a friend who calls them breadcrumbs, and I always think about the breadcrumbs that you left. I listened to an episode of the Jamie Kern Lima show, and she was talking about clues. So there's definitely this aspect of there are signs in your life that you don't know what they mean at the time, and then they come through in your life at some point. What I found in my box of mementos was a thesis paper that I wrote my senior year of English class in Kingwood High School. And I wanted to read some of this today because it is really interesting that I chose the book that I did. I'm assuming that I chose it. I don't think it was assigned, but I could be wrong. I did have a very progressive English teacher at Kingwood High School in 1992. So Karen Finley, if anyone knows Karen Finley, Mrs. Finley, who was my teacher in 92 at Kingwood High School, and can track her down and tell her that she still has an impact on me today. I have tried in the past and never been able to find her. So she is one of a handful of teachers who I can still remember being in their class, still remember their names, still remember how much they inspired me. Mrs. Gary at Ditto Elementary School is another one. I think I have been in touch with her throughout the years or at some point, but she was definitely one of them, and Mrs. Finley was one as well. So my thesis, November 9th, 1992, for English 4, Christy Campbell. My thesis was titled A Modern Woman in the Victorian Era. And I am going to not necessarily read it verbatim, but it is pretty interesting to think about, gosh, what was that, 33 years ago? I was 17. And when we think about the ways that we behaved or the things that lit us up at that time and what kind of foreshadowing they meant in our life. And even in this book, it talks about some foreshadowing. And maybe this episode will just spark your imagination or take you back to a time where you think, gosh, when I was a kid, I really wanted to do this job. Or when I was a kid, this thing, this hobby, this talent really interested in me, and I never did anything with it. And I'm here to tell you that it is never too late. The Jamie Kern Lima podcast episode that I was listening to was Anastasia Beverly Hills. Anastasia, who created that makeup company, which is $1 billion company today. And she talks about number one, being a late bloomer and that it's never too late. And number two, just following that interest wherever it leads, and what interests you and sparks your joy when you're young or throughout your whole life. What doesn't go away? And if it doesn't go away, then it's meant for you. And I'm finding that in my own life. And I gave notice at my job, and that's going to be its whole own episode and probably multiple episodes, but I am leaving a corporate job to follow creative entrepreneurship full-time, to be self-employed, and it is scary AF, and I am rocking the boat in my own life, like in my own inner psyche, to be able to do this. But today we are talking about my senior thesis and what my senior self, what my 17-year-old self knew at the time, and that my 50-year-old self is rediscovering. So my thesis was The Awakening by Kate Chopin, and it was banned for 3 decades, showing that Chopin's ideas and attitudes about women were ahead of her time. And I go on with my little outline, and I think because it was my senior year in high school, we were having to do some things that prepared us for college, and so writing a thesis paper and a research paper was one of them. A lot of what I will read in here was cited from different sources, and since I'm not necessarily going to give you my bibliography here on air, just know that a lot of this was pulled from different articles and different books about the author and the book itself. But I find this so interesting, and as far as we've come and that I talk about in this paper, we still have a long way to go, but I love everything that's in here. So I'm just going to read it, and if anything resonates with you, then know that this book was written a very long time ago. I can't remember what I pulled into the paper here, but okay. Most women of today's society are appalled at the fact that women once had to unconditionally obey their husbands, continually care for their children, and behave in the manner which society required. Yet these are the exact conditions that Edna Pontellier, I'm just going to call her Edna, faces in The Awakening. Kate Chopin embodied her belief in women's freedom in her main character, but Edna's actions did not fit the beliefs of the late Victorian era. The Awakening by Kate Chopin, which was banned for 3 decades, showed that Chopin's ideas and attitudes about women were ahead of her time. The position of women in the Victorian society that Chopin describes differs greatly from the role of women today. And keep in mind, side note, that this was written in 1992. Up until the turn of the 19th century, society was male-dominant and placed women in the home. The belief in this matriarchal or mother-ruled society resulted from the Darwinistic theory of survival of the fittest being men. And let me tell you, reading this made me like that theory a lot less. Charles Darwin's theory surfaced in the 19th century and proposed that men were the naturally stronger of the sexes. Women were not believed to possess higher intellect and thus were not allowed to attend secondary schools. Instead, they were sent to a finishing school to learn social graces. Even the rise of the upper middle professional class did little to ease the situation. With this new class came new social values, but these elite women were still second class because of their sex. The new professional class molded women that were, quote, subordinate figures expected to be well-read and in possession of more interesting accomplishments than ordinary Victorian middle-class girls, end quote. Chopin personifies this ideal Victorian woman in Adele I'm not going to get this last name right. Ratignol. Chopin describes her as the embodiment of every womanly grace and charm and the fair lady of our dreams. She is the essence of beauty, grace, obedience, and motherhood. She spends her time sewing and is expecting her fourth child. Throughout the novel, she serves as a motherly figure and possesses all the traits of a true Victorian lady. Through her description of Madame Adele, Chopin shows the place of women in the Victorian era. Now, we know that there's been this rise of TV shows like Bridgerton and The Gilded Age, which show all of these social pressures on women. And this is just me speaking, side note here, that we see that. And it's funny because in those shows, there's always the rebel. And we take it for granted that that rebel was in any way, shape, or form accepted by society during that time. And I'll go on to share what happened to the author of this book and how she was shunned and disgraced as an author. And again, talks about her book was banned for 30 years. We look at women like the lead character in Bridgerton, and of course she hid behind her letter, right, or her column, and only in the end of, I don't know if it was second or third season, does she start to become more public and rock the damn boat, because she's like, hey, this is me and I'm going to speak my truth. And with The Gilded Age, there's a couple of characters like that. I don't watch that one as closely. My husband loves history, and so he likes watching that show. Maybe not necessarily for the soap opera drama type storylines, but just for the reenactment of that time period. And of course, like I said, we see it now, and we know that there's probably storylines woven in that show how far women have come since this actual time. So let me go back to the paper, and it says, the attitudes of men promoted the idea that women belonged in the home, and many statements made in the 19th century showed how they justified their beliefs. In his book, The Intellectual Life, P.G. Hamilton wrote that women have no real intellect, only emotions and sentiment. He believed that women could only grow intellectually when guided by their husbands. British author Herbert Spencer believed that educating women used too much energy in the brain that would be needed for reproduction. Wow. John Ruskins gave a lecture entitled Of Queen's Gardens, in which he said that a woman was not a slave, but that she provided order. Being in the home kept her safe from the dangers and temptations of society. These statements show men's views in the late 1900s to be that women were inferior. No joke, 17-year-old Christy. And I'm sure I was feeling, I have a feeling that there was some part of me that really resonated with this idea that, I probably felt suppressed at the time. And I know from just like I've shared in who I am, that being raised with, in the church and following these values, that I don't think there's anything wrong with those values. I think it's good to be kind and at times proper and have a little bit of a filter when you don't want to hurt other people's feelings. So it comes for me from a place of compassion. But there's also this idea that I suppressed my truth and I didn't want to say anything that would rock the boat. And I love that reading back on this paper that I wrote when I was 17 meant that I had this inkling that I resonated with women who were boat rockers. So back to the paper. Despite these views, the latter half of the 19th century saw the beginning of an organized women's movement. Margaret Fuller was one of the earlier progressive authors. In her book, Woman in the 19th Century, and keep in mind that would be the 1800s, she follows the romantic idea that every person, man or woman, should develop to his fullest. Now, side note, interesting that I said to his fullest and not her fullest, but either way, the author believes that women should isolate themselves to better understand their identity and develop inner strength. Interesting that we go on women's retreats to help isolate ourselves and better understand our identity. She writes that women have better intuition than men and can see a situation in parts, whereas men look at the whole picture. She was a smart lady. In 1854, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, an early activist, denounced the belief that women were weak, incompetent, and pure, and believed that women were suppressed by having to stay in the home. Secondary education began to open up for women in 1871 with the founding of a national union for women's education. These ideas did not spread quickly, but they did prove that women were beginning to break away from society's norms. Edna, our book character, experienced the same desire for freedom in the awakening. She began to pursue both sexual and spiritual freedom with equal force. To spend the summer at Grand Isle was the typical family vacation for the Pontelliers, but that summer Edna felt the first pangs of discontent. She knows of, quote, that outward existence which conforms, the inward life which questions, end quote. And she begins to follow the latter. While talking to Adele, she compares her summer to a time when, as a young girl in Kentucky, she wandered aimlessly through a tall sea of grass, having no idea what direction she was headed. Her symbolic first step toward freedom is learning to swim. She casts off all inhibitions and finds that the ability to swim comes naturally to her. She began to look back with regret on her marriage of convenience, a marriage which allowed her to, quote, take her place with a certain dignity in the world of reality, closing the portals forever behind her upon the realm of romance and dreams, end quote. She loves her children dearly, but feels that raising them is a task that she blindly assumed and for which fate had not fitted her. Because of her desire for freedom from marriage and motherhood, Edna feels that she needs romance and excitement and becomes unfaithful to her husband, Leonce. She develops an interest in young Robert Lebrun and is crushed when he leaves for Mexico. She later becomes involved with the socialite and playboy Alcée Arobin and moves into a cottage on the next street. Edna's affairs outraged the marital values of the era. Her relationship with Leonce suffers due to her new independence. Edna wants inner resolution while Leonce worries about what is socially acceptable. He cannot accept that she is developing her own identity. He believes that it is just a phase. The birth of Adele's child and Robert leaving for a second time are Edna's final breaking points. She considered the child a chain to society, and witnessing its birth depresses her. And it goes on to talk about she drowns herself. And so she meets this fate that is described as her being trapped between her illusions and the condition which society arbitrarily establishes to maintain itself, and she is made to pay. Because Chopin based the novel and its themes on her own views, it was not widely accepted. The initial reaction to the novel caused scathing reviews and rejection by many bookstores. The Nation's review in 1899 considered The Awakening to be a disappointment after Chopin's stories and reduced her to, quote, one more clever author gone wrong, end quote. The scenery and minor characters were realistic, but Edna should have done one thing a day that she does want to do, flirted less, and looked after her children more. Chopin was criticized because of her sympathy for Edna and the fact that Edna received no reproach for adultery. These early harsh criticisms had a tremendous effect on Kate Chopin. The rejection she endured is summed up in this description. Chopin was devastated by the audience rejection, which took the form of hostile reviews, librarians' refusal to circulate her novel in her native city of St. Louis, and the snubbing by that city's Fine Arts Club, which declined to make her a member. Friends shunned her as reviews called The Awakening morbid, poisonous, and vulgar. One friend said Chopin was crushed, and she wrote very little in the remaining years of her life. That is so sad to me as an author. So skipping down, obviously you can see that she was shunned. Her book was banned for 3 decades. But let's talk about what happened when we flash forward. So she says, and I wrote this in my essay, that Chopin was trying to show that women should break away from the traditional way of life, but her ideas would not be accepted for another 3 decades. This acceptance came in the form of glowing reviews. In 1932, Daniel S. Rankin praised The Awakening's appealing scenery and Chopin's realistic, expressive view of Creole life. He applauded her ability to approach a morbid theme and still make the novel beautiful, appealing, and humorous. A 1956 review called The Awakening a great novel, which captures the charm and liveliness of Creole society. A review published the same year by Kenneth Ebley claimed the novel was first-rate and advanced in theme and technique over the novels of its day. And it goes on to talk about the positive reviews, the changing of society. I think, I wrote more than this, but this is supposed to be a Sunday shorty, and I feel like I could go on forever about this. Maybe we will revisit this. But when I think about how this relates to my life and what I'm doing now, rocking the boat by leaving the 9-to-5 grind, which truly is 8-to-5 now. Who does not have to be at work? If you have a corporate America job, then you are probably working 8-to-5, taking your lunch break. Maybe it's also part of society's norms for us to sit and have lunch at our desks. So you might be working 8-to-5 every day, no lunch break, not leaving your desk, working late, coming in early. I get it. I did that for 3 decades. So ironically, this whole idea of a banned book for 3 decades, I banned this part of me that wanted to live a creative life, that admired Edna for her free spirit, and who wanted to go to a liberal arts college and had these different ideas about what my life was going to look like. And sure, I will talk more about my retail journey, and I did really fall in love with the job that I made a career out of. And I'm not in such an uncomfortable place that I couldn't stay in that industry, but I am feeling such a call for something more. And I love looking back at this essay and seeing that I resonated with not only this character in this book, but also this author who was ahead of her time and writing about things that people didn't talk about, and she was criticized for it, but then praised for it later when people started to accept and normalize the idea that women could do what they want and be independent thinkers. And that is how I feel. That is why I am rocking the damn boat with this podcast and trying to find things that some people in some areas of the country or some societal circles might talk about all the time. But in my area, we don't necessarily talk about these the way I was raised. I never talked about them. And I am going to rock the damn boat by bringing my opinions to life in the hopes that some people who have not been able to express these same opinions do the same and use their voice. I am going to wrap this up. I am launching a coaching business as my next chapter. So leaving my position as a corporate retail director and moving into coaching and confidence and leadership coaching. I am launching a program in January. I am hosting a retreat at the end of January. So I hope that you follow me on socials and also listen to the podcast for more news to come. Follow, subscribe this podcast. I will bring a short version on Sundays and a long version every Wednesday. And if you listen to this one, then you might have a little bit of foreshadowing that there is a longer one coming very soon about my corporate exit. I'm Christy Hughes. Keep rocking the damn boat, and I will chat with you again soon.